CSS and JavaScript is a hotly debated topic, and my belief is regardless of what you initially think about something, it's almost always worth giving it a shot to really understand how it works and whether or not it fits for you. So in this video, we're going to get started with styled components in React by migrating a CSS React project to using styled components. All right, first off, if you enjoy this video, please give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and then turn on the notification bell so that you can get the latest updates on content when it comes out. All right, now we're gonna go ahead and start on the Styled Components homepage, and this is styled-components.com. This is the library that we're gonna use. It's very popular in React. And let's just talk about what it allows us to do. Well, it allows us to write CSS in our JavaScript. Now, a lot of people think this is a really bad thing, and they don't really like the idea of mixing their CSS with their JavaScript, intermingling these different things. And if you go back to separation of concerns, best practices, at least up until now, separating CSS, separating markup, separating JavaScript was really how people like to do that. React pushed the limits by basically intermingling your markup with your JavaScript, and now we're intermingling with our CSS and our JavaScript as well. So I want to come into the documentation and the motivation page, and this just gives you a little bit of insight into why you might be interested in using styled components. So the first one is automatic critical CSS. So if the CSS is not being used, if that component isn't displayed on the screen, that CSS isn't included in the markup either. So it's only showing or including the CSS that's actually being displayed on the screen as well. Another thing is no class name bugs, and this comes from the fact that if you write really generic class names and your project gets bigger and bigger, it's easy to have overlap on class names that can lead to some issues. So what this means is the CSS here is scoped to a given component, so that CSS will be automatically tied to that given component. Easier deletion of CSS. Then the next one here is a big one for me, simple dynamic styling. Because you're able to add JavaScript to your CSS, you can do any sort of if logic or checking to see if a prop is there. You get props in styled components just like any other React component. You can check whether those things are there, and then based on that, you can do different things, add different styles, change the background color, whatever it is you want to do, which is pretty cool. Automatic vendor prefixing, so you get that out of the box as well. But again, the two big things for me, one is that you get to work with styled components almost exactly like you would a regular React component, so it just feels familiar. And then lastly, you get to use JavaScript instead of having to learn less and Sass and all the different syntaxes that are out there. Use the JavaScript that you already know to add some dynamic capabilities to your site. So let's start by looking at the project that we're going to migrate over from CSS to styled components. And this is just a demo project, so don't overthink this, but we've got a navbar. We're going to do that whole thing. We've got this split component where you split content left and right, this image on the right, and then this dummy text over here on the left. And then the only other page that works is the pricing page. So if you check out the starter code, the docs log in and get started for free don't work. They're just there for the navbar purposes. And then we're going to create this this pricing page and then look at styling this button here as well for primary versus secondary. All right, so that's what we're going to do. There is included in the description here, you have a link to the starter code in Code Sandbox as well as the finished code. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to work locally in VS Code. I've got the starter code checked out, and I'm just going to go through and start converting these things to styled components. So I'm also turned on a screen capture setting in VS Code. So I'm curious if you have any feedback on what that looks like from your perspective watching this video. Is it something you enjoy to see what shortcuts I'm using? Or does it just get in the way? So let me know on that as well. So I need to start by installing styled components. And I can see how this text is already going to get a little bit annoying, but I'll try for this video and you can let me know again in the comments what you think. So we'll install styled components and then we're basically ready to go. So I want to look at how this app is broken down. In the app, it's set up with React Router for the different pages, but we only have route set up for home and pricing. And then the navbar has links to the other ones, but you can see that the ones that aren't actually real don't have the two properties set. All right, so we've got styled components installed. I'm gonna do npm run start and start up our project again. All right, so the project is up and running and you can see it here. Let's go home just to refresh, show you it's working. All right, there it is. Let's start with something really basic like the container div that everything sits in. So if we scroll to the top of the CSS file, here's our container. We want to convert this to a styled component. We're going to create several styled components. So inside of source, go ahead and create a directory called styled. And then inside of here, we can create one called container. And first you need to import styled from styled components. And now we will create the actual container component. So I will export const container and make sure all of these are uppercase so that React understands that they are custom components and not just regular DOM elements. And the way this works is you call or you use styled and then you do dot and then the type of DOM element that you're working with, in this case a div. And then you use these backticks. It looks like template literal strings and it's pretty close to what it is. The exact name of what this is in here is tag template literal instead of just template literal. So this is kind of a new thing. If you've written GraphQL queries with Gatsby or something like that, you've probably seen this as well. But basically inside of here, we're just gonna put the styles for our component. So let's grab the styles for this component here, just copy that and then paste them inside of this component. And now that component's done, that's all we need to do. That will give us a div that has these styles. So now inside of the app.js, basically what we're gonna do is go through and remove all of these class names. So anything that has a class name, we're gonna remove and swap out for styled components. So with this is going to be a container, and I get an auto import here. But if you don't get auto import, make sure that you install this. And then we're just wrapping our routes in this container component. And then lastly, we can remove these styles from the CSS file. So let's look at just making sure that this still looks right. It does. There's a little bit of padding regardless of how small on the outside. So that's basically what that container does. So that still works. So that's our first component that we just created. All right, now let's move on to the next one. Let's go ahead and start with the navbar. So let's create a styled and then a navbar.js. And if you're watching this, one of the most important things you're going to want to do is install this extension, the VS Code styled components extension. What this will do is it will give you IntelliSense and code formatting inside of your JavaScript files for styled components. And that's really important because otherwise it would be really horrible to write your CSS in your JavaScript if you didn't get that. All right, so let's import styled from styled components again, and we'll start with the navbar. So navbar is styled.nav because it's a nav DOM element. And then inside of here, we can just grab the CSS for the navbar. So let's grab this stuff here. All right, let's paste that in. And then in addition to this, instead of writing a separate media query, we can actually put this right inside of our navbar. So now we get the nesting of something like less or sass or something like that. And we can get rid of the element that we're targeting because this is specifically targeting this navbar. Now this is nice for readability. When I read this, I know exactly what this component is going to do because of this specific breakpoint here. All right, and then we need a few more. So we will need nav brand, nav items, nav item, and then link button is the rest of what we need. So I'm gonna go ahead and stub those out. So we'll need a const nav brand. And what's going to be different about this is it's going to style a link component. Now this link component comes from React Router, so we need to import that. Import link from React Router DOM. All right, so there's our nav brand, and then I'm gonna copy this a few times. So nav brand, then we've got nav items. That's going to be a UL. And then what else do we have? Nav brand, nav items, nav item. And this will be an LI. Nav item. And then lastly, is it a link button? Yeah, so const link button. And I think this is also styling. Let's look in the navbar. This will also style a link tag as well. So link button equals styled, and then we pass it link, and then we go ahead and style that thing this way. All right, we've got that stuff subbed out. Now, this is kind of the boring part, but now we just copy in our CSS. So let's grab, maybe we can put these side by side. Let's get rid of the sidebar, put the CSS over on this side, and let's just go one by one. Let's grab the nav brand styles, then the nav items styles. Bring that on a new line. Then nav item. And then we'll do something that we just did a second ago. We can also embed our hover states there as well. So we can do this with the and then the hover. So there's our hover baked into that nav item. Again, that makes it really easy to see exactly what it does. And then our link button. But then we get into the situation where we have a link button primary, and this is where we can take advantage of the usefulness of styled components. And that is the fact that it's a component, we can pass it properties so that we can add extra styles if this button is a primary button, where we'll change the background and then change the color as well. Okay, so let's do this by, we first open up a variable, basically a variable inside of template literals. And this is going to be a function that takes in props, and then it's going to return if props.primary. So props.primary, this is a shortcut. If the primary property is there, and then we can use this thing called, even this out a little bit, we can import the CSS object from styled components as well. And then we can use the CSS here to type in raw CSS. All right, so now we can just add those extra styles right inside of here for our primary. So we can copy this stuff and put it right inside of here. And then the formatting on this for prettier looks a little bit odd, so that's not optimal. But I think it's pretty cool to be able to dynamically update and add properties in our CSS with JavaScript. All right, so that looks right. Now we just go through and grab all of this code, all of this nav stuff. Let's get rid of that. I also don't need this title element. Let's save it, and then we'll come over to our navbar, and now we just start replacing everything in our navbar, the classes that we used previously. Now we just use our component. So this will be the navbar, and I don't think I'm getting IntelliSense from this, so I'm going to import navbar, nav brand, nav items, link button. All right, so we've got those imported from, and then we'll go back to styled and navbar. All right, so there's our import, and looks like we've got some naming here. So let's name this one. Since our actual component here, the React component is named navbar, we're getting some conflicts here. So let's name this as styled navbar. Sometimes you need to do that just to avoid naming collisions. So we've imported all of those. We've got the styled navbar here. Then we've got a nav brand. Then we've got the nav items. And then each of these is going to become a nav item individually. So again, we're just going through and replacing all of our class names with styled components. All right, so that looks like we got them converted. Okay, let's save that. Nav brand is not exported from navbar. Let's see what we missed there. Our nav brand, oh, probably none of these are export const. So we want to make sure we export each of these. Okay, save that. And the first one is missing as well. So export const style navbar. Now we should see those things are okay. Looks like one of my tabs froze here. So I'm just opening up in a new tab and just double checking that the navbar looks okay, except for these buttons. I think we forgot to do those. So let's grab, this isn't actually a nav item. This is going to be a link button. And then the same thing for this one. And then we'll see one of the really cool things here in a second. So we should see our buttons here are okay. Now, the thing we're missing though is we want this to be a primary button instead of a secondary. So to do that, we can just add the property of primary right there. So you can see that although this looks pretty close, we're still missing a little bit of our styling on these buttons. And what we want to do is actually take all the styles that we defined for our nav item and also apply them to the link button. So instead of just directly saying that we're going to style a link, we can actually include the nav item or extend the nav item so that these buttons are going to get all of those same styles. So now we should see this looks like what we expected. And I think we'll see pricing button doesn't work. That's because we still need to pass it the to property of the React router link. So we'll just say to pricing, and then the nav brand will be the same thing. So to the home page. All right, let's see if we can get between those two pages, doc or pricing. And unfortunately the buttons look good, but we see that these links aren't working. This isn't taking us to the pricing page, even though we define the to value. So we need to be really careful of what element we are styling when we do this. And this is actually going to style the link component. And then when we extend the nav item with the link button, it will style a nav item, which in turn will style a link. So these should now work to go to the pricing page and the cool product page. And those buttons look good there. So now let's take a look at this split component really quickly. This is in the home component. And it's just got three different components that we need to create: the regular split, the split title, and then the split image here. So let's open up our files under styled. Let's create a split JS. Let's import styled from styled components. And then let's go ahead and stub these out. So we'll export const, and this will be split, and this will be a style div like so. And then export const split title styled, and what is this, in H1? Yeah, H1. All right, and the last one is the split image, and this is a styled image like so. And now again, we just copy in our styles there. So let's get rid of all of these nav styles. And let's grab the code for the split. So the first one, the split, is just using display of grid using CSS grid with 3 columns, aligning those things center vertically, and then putting a grid gap between them. And then we also have a media query. So we talked about this before, but we can embed this media query right inside, just like you would with less or sass, but you don't need to add the extra target of .split. And then we grab split title. This is just a little bit of font size, nothing much there. And then split image as well. All right, so that looks good. And then inside of home, now let's update it to use our new split components. So instead of div class name of split, we'll have the split component, get some auto import there. Then we'll have the split title. And is that one not importing? Nope. So let's do split title, import that one. And the last one is the split image here. So let's grab this part and say split image. And this is not defined. We didn't get IntelliSense there. Split image, go ahead and import that. All right, so now this should look the same, and it should still be responsive, as well as the navbar. So as we get down to 786, the navbar will wrap to a new line, and then the computer image will wrap to a new line as well. So I think if that gets a little bit repetitive, I'm going to skip the pricing section here. You can find the styled components for the pricing section inside of the finished product in Code Sandbox. So you have access to all that code. You can ask questions in the comments if you want. The one other thing I want to talk about is cleaning up the rest of our CSS. So our goal is to get rid of all of this CSS. So we'll skip, I think we're not using either one of those. So we'll skip the pricing section, which is what we have below, and the buttons. Those are pretty straightforward. But what I want to do is show you how to set up this body information, because we don't really get a chance to target the body element in React. So what we use is create global styles from styled components. Let's see if we can look this up. Create global style components. And here's an article on Medium using the Create Global Style API. And it's pretty straightforward. You import, maybe zoom in on this, you import Create Global Style, you use that with a tag template literal, and then you just include that component somewhere in your project. So I'm just gonna copy this part here and create inside of our style to create here in styled called global.js, paste in that little bit of code, and let me grab the styles for this body here, and then we can close out the CSS file and move this one back over here for some more space. So here's our global styles, and inside of body, we can just add those styles, and directly we can add a little bit of formatting here, clean that up a little bit. And now these styles will be applied after we include this component inside of our app.js. So inside of here, what do we call this thing? Global style is what that thing is called. We need to make sure we export it, save that. And then we can just include this right inside of our router component in React, and we'll get global style and get the auto import there as well. So we should see that now everything looks the same. It works as it should. If we go back to the home, everything looks good. So we've converted almost everything over to styled components. There's still a few things, the buttons and the pricing page that are left in CSS. It just gets kind of repetitive. It uses those same techniques. So I think maybe that could be a challenge for you to go ahead and convert those as part of your practice as well. If you have any questions on that, please feel free to leave them in the chat. But that's also one of the interesting things about styled components is typically people don't mix them with other strategies. But if you're converting from styled components or to styled components from regular CSS, you don't have to do it all in one shot. You can take it a chunk at a time and kind of progressively go through a big project and convert little pieces at a time. So I think that's kind of interesting here to show that it works regardless of what you mix it with. Ideally, you want to kind of be consistent with one or the other. So question of the day for people out there watching this video, are you a fan of styled components? Have you used styled components? Are you a fan of CSS and JavaScript at all? Or are you on the other side of the fence? Let me know how you feel in the comments. Thank you again for checking out the video, and I will see you in the next one.